Buongiorno a tutti. I understand a little bit of Italian, but I definitely don't speak it. My mother tongue is Spanish, so you'll forgive me for a very, very bad accent. The topic of today is Asciidoctor, because writing docs does not have to suck. So I will assume that most of you are developers. Am I correct? Yeah. How many of you have to write documentation as well? Perfect, so most of you. Do you like it? Do you like the experience? Yeah, right. Exactly, we are developers. We enjoy writing code, writing documentation, not so much. Okay, well, hopefully what you're going to see today will change your mind. Anybody here has already previous experience with Asciidoc or Asciidoctor? Just a few hands. Okay, you are at the right spot. My name is Adres Almiray. I come from Mexico, currently living and enjoying the chocolate in Switzerland, and where we do a lot of interesting stuff with open source. At any point you have any questions, please let me know. Feel free to interrupt me. If I speak it very fast, also please let me know, and I will slow down. So, Asciidoctor, it's a little bit of history. The format is part of what we call the family of microformats. You might have been maybe also familiar with Markdown. So you can write documentation very fast with Markdown, but the moment that you need to do fancy stuff as block quotes and tables or something extra, you have to revert back into HTML. So you have a mix of syntax, Markdown and HTML. Asciidoc doesn't suffer that problem. It gives you syntax for everything that you need to do with HTML, sorry. But it also allows you to transform this basic doc or basic plain text doc into different formats, not just HTML, but also PDF or EPUB of Kindle or something more. And so for those of you that have not seen Asciidoc before, here's a very basic example. We can take this document and render it into HTML. So the first line is the title. Then we have some additional metadata, such as who is the author or authors, and a version number for the document, very important. Then comes a first paragraph, and when you see that weird thing over there, that's a link. Now, for those that are familiar with Markdown, the text that goes on the link is always on the square brackets, and the URL goes in the parentheses. In Markdown, in Asciidoc, the text that says what the link is also in the square brackets, so that's the fixed part, and everything else is the actual link. Just like the title, you can indent with multiple sections. So the first title has an equal sign, and multiple sections will have more equal signs. So we have lists, very simple, and we can also have a source block. In this case, it only comprises of a single source line that says puts hello world in Ruby, and we have a little annotation saying that this is Ruby. So when we render this code, then it will look like a really nice HTML. We'll see actually, I'm going to go do a live coding session, so you will see what are the different comparisons. Here's another thing that we can see. Basic syntax for changing how the text gets rendered. So you want to see it in bold, just put asterisks around the words. You want to see it in italic, it's underscore. And if you want to see it in code or formatted, like in monospace, then you use the backticks. You have multiple blocks. If you want to identify something like a source block that has multiple lines, then just make sure that you define all that block with 4 dash lines at the beginning and 4 dash lines at the end. You can have an annotation on top saying this is a source block and have another hint saying this is Ruby code, but it could be Java, Kotlin, anything you want to XML and JavaScript as well. You might either use 4 dots or 4 dashes. And there are a few additional blocks that the one that uses 4 pluses and 4 slashes. So if you use pluses, the content that you put right there is sent directly to the output. So if you want to showcase JavaScript without executing JavaScript, you can put the 4 pluses. But if you want to comment out a big block of documentation without deleting that, then you use the backslashes. You might have picked up that I'm already referring to the documentation as code. Because in Asciidoc, well, besides commenting out blocks, we also have access to something that we call attributes. And attributes are nothing more than just a fancy name for variables. What can we do with variables? We can assign values. You can define attributes within the document, or they can be defined outside, and it's up to the tool that we use to translate the document into the final format to supply in those attributes. So here I have an example of two attributes. One that the name of the attribute is some key, and the value is text, some value. And there's another attribute whose name is version num, and its value is 1.2.3. And the way that we use these attributes is by using the braces. So when you put the braces and the name of the attribute, when it's rendered, it will actually make use of the value of the attribute. So if we have variables, as developers, what can we do with them besides printing out the values? Well, we can have conditionals. What are good conditionals for in a document? Well, say that, one of the examples that I like to portray is that, well, I'm talking to you in English, and you probably have to write documentation for some of your non-Italian speaking customers. But what if you wanted to have also content in Italian? Well, it would be okay to have two sources, right? But what if we were able to put the content in just one file, and given certain conditions, you will render certain content in English or certain content in Italian. So that's why we would like to have conditionals. There are two ways that we can make this work. One is just an inline conditional, which is the first one that you see. The first says, if the attribute foo is defined, by defining has some value, whatever value that is, then the content within the brackets is going to be rendered. And then we say, if the bar, and you can see bar was not defined, then that content will not be rendered. The moment that we apply a value, or we define a value to bar, then we will see the content. You can also split this into a big paragraph, so you can do if def, the name of the attribute, and then whatever content you want, and then make sure that you close it with end if and the name of the attribute. So as long as that attribute value is existing, then the content will be rendered. Well, so far so good, I guess. You could find most of these things already in Markdown, but besides attributes and conditionals. But I'm going to show you what is the secret sauce. What's the reason why I jumped into Asciidoctor 6 years ago? And that, my friends, is called the include macro. The include macro allows any document to reference to another outside source or another document, if you will, and have the contents of the secondary document be imported into the first one. Okay, so that means we can split out a huge document in several chapters or sections, different files, and have everything included. All right, that's not really that groundbreaking, I would say. There are ways to do this with Markdown. What will be important is we, as developers, when we have to write technical documentation, oftentimes we have to embed snippets of code. And these snippets of code come from production. So when we make the first release, all things are in sync, everything is fine, right? No problems. Then developers go ahead and make another release, and we forgot to update the documentation, and it looks not so nice. And so we have now to keep these things in sync. And we always copying and pasting from production into documentation, right? What if there were a way for the document to refer to the production code and just have it embedded into the document? Wouldn't that be great? Right? Let me show you. So there are many ways that we can have Asciidoctor running. The way that I'm going to show is through the Asciidoctor Gradle plugin, but there is a Maven plugin. You can also do it on the command line. You can do it on the browser. There's even an extension that allows you to run Asciidoctor on Chrome or in Firefox, so you can render the content directly. So I already have a Gradle build running in the background with the -t parameter here. That means the build executes whatever it needs to execute and keeps running in the background. Whenever I change a resource, the task that runs Asciidoctor will rerun automatically. I don't have to do anything. And the document that I have rendered looks like this. There's a title, document, author, this, and some table of contents, and some basic text. Now this code looks like this, like that. So the nice thing about the IntelliJ Asciidoctor plugin is that it will split your view in two. On one side, you can see the plain document, and on the other side, you can see what will be rendered. Some of these attributes are defined by the build, and the Asciidoctor IntelliJ plugin is not aware of those attributes. That's why we see them like this. These are plain values to it. But if we were to define a value such as conference here, and we call it Box Days Milano, and here in the introduction, before the introduction, we say something like, welcome to conference, and it says Box Days Milano. So I save this. You will see that the build runs again. I mean, this is just a convenience for me to be sure that everything is running, and do a refresh, and there's welcome to Box Days Milano. I could probably do this in bold, like this. So Box Days Milano, and let's make it another one. Happy to be here. This will be italic. And I'm going to show some code. Some code like this. Right? So when it's re-render, it just takes a second, and it looks like that. So that's italic, and that looks like code. Perfect. But what I really want to show you is the capabilities of having embedded source code. So I'm going to say something like, I think my code is Groovy, and I add the 4 lines, so that's fine. Now what I'm going to do is include macro, and I have to give it a path. The path has to be the one that goes all the way to my file. So I can write it all the way to the left, or if I want, I can also generate some attributes here. So I know that my code is inside source main Groovy, and this will be source path. That's the name that I want, and the value is source main Groovy, and the package will be I think is org cordamp Gradle OCI. And the build already has defined an attribute that looks like a Gradle root dir, I believe. This is the beginning of my whole project. And then I have to go into plugins, and then OCI Gradle plugin. What I'm doing here is this. This is the root of my file, of my project. The guide that I'm looking for is currently into docs guide and then this document. But I want to reach out to this class that is parallel, coming from plugins, OCI, Gradle, source, main Groovy, blah, blah, blah. So the only thing that I need to do is construct that path all the way there. So now I can apply source path, and then can also apply source package. And finally, I can say OCI plugin.groovy. And if I did this correctly, and I re-render this, and if there is no warning about the include, there we go. Here's my documentation. Here's the code. This looks really nice, but if I want to embed production code, perhaps I don't want to embed the whole file. I just want to embed pieces of that. For example, I want to take out the license header. Well, no worries. I can say something like lines and then look into the plugin and see code begins in line 18. Okay, so go here and say lines equals 18. Oh, I should make this a little bit, how can I make this bigger like that? Line 18 to, what will be the last line? Well, I can look for the last line, but if I start to refactor my code, the last line is going to change. But I can make use of a data type from Ruby because Asciidoctor is implemented in Ruby and we're running inside the JVM thanks to JRuby. Data types such as a range, and if you add a -1 here, it will always go at the end of the structure, whether it's a list or a file or whatnot. So when I do this, and it re-renders in just a second, and do a refresh here, there we go. Nice. Say that I want to just present the apply method. So we will have to find that method that is in line 35 to 38. All right, so let's do that. 35 to 38. And then I refactor my code. So let's save, we will refresh, and blah, blah, blah. So now it looks like this in just a moment. Whoop, there we go. We have some spaces here. It would be sad if we would have to change our production code so our documentation looks better, right? Would it be nice if there were a way for us to transform this code so that it gets aligned to the left or to the right? Sure, we can change the indentation and just give it indent equals 0 and rerun this thing one more time and do a refresh, and there it goes. You can say indent 4 or 8 or more, so you can keep moving one way or another. But what if we refactor our code? What if I, for some reason, I say, this method should go at the top, all right? And, well, in this case, it's not listening to changes. Maybe it does. No, it didn't. Oop, it's doing something. No, didn't pick it up. What if I wanted to present this one now? So here's one thing that I can say. To be safe around refactorings and to be sure that we can always select the portion of code that I want to present, I can use a feature called tags, using regular code comments for the specific language you're using. So this works in XML. If you use regular XML comments and JavaScript or any other supported language. So I can say something like tag, colon, colon, and then give it a name. This will be any name you want. So my method, and some brackets. You can see brackets as the place where you're going to pass additional arguments to a macro. In this case, we're using the tag macro. And we can say end, dash, dash, colon, colon, the name of the tag, my method. There we go. Then we go here, and instead of using lines, we say tags equals my method with an underscore there. Then we let this save, execute again, and there we go, save, and now it's the method. Isn't that great? Here's another thing that I can do. You probably have seen in guides or books some kind of annotations that look like this. Here's some random code. And I'll let this rerun again. And we got this annotation, but we would like to have this number somehow apply here, right? How can we make this happen? Well, again, by using source code here, and we can apply just a regular code comment and use the same notation as we saw earlier to define the caption. I believe that in this case I will have to rerun it again manually, and come on. like this, and do a refresh. Okay, I know what's going on. No bill cache. So, make it a bit slow, but this will make it work. Here we go. There it is. It works again for every single language that is supported. Once I discovered this feature, I started to write a lot of documentation. And for me, now it feels like I'm programming documentation because I have access to variables, I have access to conditionals if needed be. If I need it, also, I can have, let's go back to my index here. And I want to comment out this section of links. So instead of removing that, I just add these 4 characters, and this again, let it re-render, and we're done. So remember, these links will disappear. Now, they're gone. But I did not lose them because they're still part of my document. And because we are dealing with just a plain text document, what happens when you need to interact with your team members? How do you track changes? If you use a binary format like Office, well, it gets really, really sad very quickly. But if it's a simple text format, just like Java sources, what else do we use to do reviews? Any other tool, right? Like Crossable, like anything else that you do for code reviews, you can use for the plain text file. You can also, if you're hosting your documentation on Git, then you can use regular diffs to figure out what has changed, just like we do with our own developer tools. That's the reason why I like this thing. Okay, here are more things that I like to show. If you ever had trouble creating tables in Markdown, well, let me show you how simple that is. So there is this basic syntax to start a table, and we can say something like the header, this will be column 1, and column 2, and column 3. By default, we just separate it by 1 empty row, and we can say this is cell 11, and cell 22, and cell, no, that's not right. Cell 12 and cell 1.3. I also can do this way, cell 2.1, cell 2.2, and cell 2.3. Now notice that here it gets rendered in this way, and let's see how it gets rendered in the final document. Looks like that. What if we wanted to have alignments? No worries. We can say something like calls, and say the first column will be aligned to the left, the center column will be aligned to the center, and the right column will be aligned to the right. Okay? You saw here that the rendering mechanism is already showing you that alignments are going to be the ones that we're hoping for. And save, regenerate this thing, and do refresh, and we change the alignment. Very simple. Okay, but things do not stop here. We can also have this kind of list. Let's say we have element 1, colon, some information about this. And we can duplicate this and say column that. Notice how this list is rendered with a block bold element here, and the text is in the next row, like that. But if I want to, I can give it another hint here and say, let's put it on the top, horizontal. Notice how now this is rendered. And if I let the build run again and look into the generated HTML, it looks like that. Now, what is this thing? These are known as, I think it's labels. I think it's a technical term. And you can have your own labels. So if you want to support something that is not coming from the standard Asciidoc syntax, then you can create your own label. You can extend the syntax, because it so happens that Asciidoctor, which is the toolchain that understands the Asciidoc syntax, when it passes your document, and before it actually creates the render document, it creates an abstract syntax tree of your document. So what else creates an abstract syntax tree of something, of a source? A compiler. So you basically have an Asciidoc compiler at your fingertips. And there are some compilers that allow you to hook into the compilation process and modify what has been processed. In this case, Asciidoctor has something called extensions. So you can write custom extension that hooks into the compiler process and massage the AST. What you can do with that is add new blocks, remove blocks, or change everything. So I have an example. I think this is enough for this particular example. I have an example of something like that. And I think it's GitHub and Asciidoctor Pick Latin example. Does anybody know what Pick Latin is? Nice. Okay, in the US, for some reason, people in college like to speak in a very weird language, which is take the first letter of a word, put it at the end, and then add AY. But if the first letter happens to be a vowel, then they have to change the rules. So it's easy to understand, but it's just weird. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is run the Asciidoc build for this particular project, and I'm going to show the rendered document that is in build Asciidoc, I think, no, docs index. So here we have just title, the same thing that we saw earlier, some content, and then an example of a sentence in English, and I want to see what is the translation into the Pick Latin way. And that is it. So I think this one doesn't have any weird things with the vowels. There's only over. Here we see. It's just weird, as I said before. Now, I don't expect you guys to know what exactly how all the rules to translate Pick Latin. It would be great if we can automate this thing. So let me show you the source file for this. We go into documentation here, and I make this bigger. And there's a paragraph. There's the English sentence. And then the English sentence again. But we have this special tag, this special label that says Pick Latin. Now the thing is that because we're able to extend the Asciidoctor syntax, what we're doing here with this particular project is adding an extension in this way. We have to register the extension. This is example extension registry, this guy here. Registers two blocks, one that says Pick Latin and the other that says source. This one is, we're not making use of that one. And then the Pick Latin block, I'm gonna make this bigger. This is your regular code. This can be Java code, Scala, Kotlin, Groovy, you name it. It can even be Ruby, as long as we can hook into the Asciidoc compiler. So we are transforming paragraphs. So you can annotate a paragraph, and whatever it's annotated is going to be translated by this extension. And this looks a little bit weird, but what we're doing is say, we identify something that looks like a paragraph, so we're going to grab the content. And what this thing is doing is, once it knows which paragraph it is going to read everything, all the text using a just standard Java I/O reader. And for the reader, what this code is doing, if you're not familiar with Groovy code, it looks like Lambda. What it does is split the paragraph into words, and then apply a transformation to each word, and then join all the words again with the spaces. So the actual code that we need to look at is this transformation. This is the one that has all the rules. But the beauty thing is that even if we don't understand that, the only thing that we have to do back in our document is this. Just apply the tag. So if you want to have automatic translation from English to Italian and vice versa, you could create an extension that does a translation with Google Translate or some other service, and then just apply here something like translate like this. And it will automatically know that it has to be translated to the language that you have set. Maybe you can say something additional, give additional arguments such, I want it to translate it to French now, or to Spanish, or to something else, but it will use the same translate mechanism. Here's another thing that we can do. How many of you are actually writing web applications? Okay, half of you. For those of you that said that you have to write documentation, from time to time, I guess you have to take screenshots of the application, right? And then those screenshots will get out of date very, very quickly if someone changes the CSS or they do something else. So you have to go again and change the extensions. What if there were a way to take automatic pictures of your document or your website and then embed it in the document? Would you like that? Let me show you, you can. There is an extension called Asciidoctor J screenshot, and we have a ready-made example. So I'm going to clean here. This doesn't work. Oh, we go into Gradle. That was the wrong place. And make sure that I'm not cheating, so we remove everything. Now we do, we render here, and notice that at some point there will be a screen popping up. Oh. It's gonna fail? No, it's working. Yes. And is something fail? Let me check what was the case. Didn't take the screenshot. We go here, Asciidoc index. Maybe it's because of the VGA resolution, because it's very, very small. Because it complained that the image is smaller than the requested screenshot. This is sad. I don't think it rendered completely. Let's look at that. No, we have this screen, and it looks like this, but the documentation failed. Again, it's because of the resolution that I'm using to present it. But the thing is that the Asciidoctor screenshot extension opened a browser, it navigated to a certain URL and took a screenshot and then saved it, and in theory, this should have been embedded back into the document. So the only thing that we see here in this document is, well, there's some text, blah, 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 and then this special code block. And what this extension is doing is called the JEB extension. It uses a script that is based on the Groovy language that relies on JEB and the web driver mechanism. So basically, again, Selenium. What you're doing is you're driving Selenium from your documentation, browsing to a specific URL, and then using something that looks like jQuery to locate an element, and that will be the element that is going to be the one used for the screenshot. And then we embed at any point in our document that particular screenshot. You can give additional arguments when you take the screenshot, such as this ones here. This particular screenshot, we were trying to go into another CSS selector, but this whole code is commented out, you might remember this block, because it so happens that this website no longer produces the elements in the expected way. This example is quite old, so now you can see that, well, the screenshot, if it were to be taken, it would be wrong. I can continue to have my document, but just this code will have to be updated. So instead of just deleting, I comment it out, and then later I will make it better. All right, how are we doing so far? Are you guys excited about this? Because I am. More things that you could do. Do I have an example? Yes, I do have an example of that. Dev, GitHub, JSR 377, and API, and I can say, I can do just a full build. What this particular project has is some interfaces that define a specification, a document that has also a specification, but one of the things that I would like to have is also some kind of diagrams. Now, of course, you can create diagrams using any vector graphic program, or you can ask a friend designer to create the diagrams for you. But if it's not right, then it's a back and forth going on, and it takes forever to have the final graphics. So what if you were able to create some simple graphics like this? Let's go into the specification document, and let's see somewhere here. Here we have something that looks like this, and let me search for another one. I think it's in the diagrams project, here. Here we have this Asciidoc, and we have this thing that looks just like an ASCII diagram, right? A few blocks and lines connecting this thing, and we have some parameters saying where I want to save this, but when I render the document, the final one, which should be inside JSR spec build, didn't do it, GW ASCII, so render that, please, there we go, okay. So JSR spec build Asciidoctor index HTML, and somewhere, hopefully, there is, well, there's a source. Where is my diagram? There's the diagram, right there. Now, you can use this extension called Asciidoctor diagram to also create UML diagrams, all kinds of diagrams using an extension called a language, no, it's not a language, a project called Plant UML. And you can also have colors, you can have different shapes, you can have dotted lines, and all that you have to go back is just simple ASCII text embedded into your document, just like that. Now, funny thing is that this project, Asciidoctor diagram, is based on a library called Dita with double A. Dita is a Ruby gem, but the Ruby gem is wrapping around a Java library called Dita. So it's weird that we have Java embedded in Ruby, wrap around JRuby, so you can run it in Gradle that runs in Java and Ruby, so it all works. It's just a big polyglot thingy that is known as the JVM. Just works. All right, so I believe, and I could go on and on and on with this thing, so let me go back to the slides. And showing, there we go. So that was the include macro. The Asciidoctor community is big. We started the project, I think it was 7 years ago or so, when Dan Allen had a problem. He had an itch, just like many open source projects. He had problems documenting a project, Archillian. So he found out about Asciidoc, took on the project, created Asciidoctor, and we got this. And when he started, some other people got excited, and then the Maven plugin came by, and I am the author of the Gradle plugin, that's what I like to show it. And then Asciidoctor.js happened, and Asciidoctor.j and a few other things, and boom, now we have a huge ecosystem of projects around Asciidoctor, and everything can be found here on GitHub, the Asciidoctor organization. Most of the projects that we promote in the JVM are found on Bintray. So here we have a few faces. This guy right over there, that is Dan. He is the one that started it all. It's his fault that we're having so much fun writing documentation. And a few other things that have happened. If you write blog posts, then some of you probably use Jekyll or WordPress or something else. But what if you wanted to use Asciidoc? So everything that I showed, you can use it also on your blog post. Well, there are many tools out there, but one of them is called JBake that allows you to create a static website with many different templates. And one of the formats they support is Asciidoc, and it just works out of the box. I also show IntelliJ, the editor. The idea of Asciidoc syntax is that you concentrate on the content and do not think too much about the syntax. So there is not really a full-blown rich text editor. So the IntelliJ plugin works okay. It gives you some hints. If you are into Eclipse, there is also an Asciidoc extension for Eclipse. But there is also a JavaFX project called Asciidoc.fx. It's a full-blown rich text editor. The whole documentation is written in Asciidoc as well. And on one side, you can see that there's a content similar to the IntelliJ plugin and the render content. But this one gives you an overview. And here are some buttons that will allow you to apply certain styling to the content. And I think that we're almost done with the time. So everything that we saw today is open source. Let me remind you of that. Feel free to tinker and play with this. And if you have not contributed to open source, let me tell you that it's very, very easy. You find a problem with anything that I showed today or any other open source library that you consume or daily work, file a ticket. You're done. Nothing else. Just make sure that you give enough steps to reproduce the problem, some information about the environment, engage in a conversation. If you have the time and the passion, supply a test case. Or even better, supply a patch. But at the very least, just file a ticket. And that is plenty for us open source maintainers. Most of the stuff that I saw today, I discussed in these links. The first is a newsletter in English and the same content, but in Spanish. Sadly, no Italian yet. Maybe I should use a translation service with Asciidoc, because I write this content in Asciidoc and publish to my blog. So with that, thank you very much. I hope that I give you some highlights and some additional information on Asciidoc. I don't know how much I can transfer my excitement about Asciidoc, because for me, since I found Asciidoc, I no longer write sad and boring documentation. I code documentation. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes. Okay, so the question is, we're polluting the code by using tags, right? So, and we're using the tags to identify the piece of code that we want to embed into documentation. So the question is there an easier way to identify a specific piece of code without polluting the source code? Yes, it's possible. I am not so sure the extension already exists. You could use a project called Java Parser from GitHub that will understand your source code, and so that in the Asciidoc section, you will have a different version of the include macro. Maybe it's a custom include macro, where what you say, give me, what is the URL or the path to the source file, plus an argument stating what is the method or method names that you want to see embedded. That will make it work, but I'm not so sure if it already exists. I'm pretty sure that we have had this discussion before, and that was about 5 years ago, and I believe that the Java Parser plugin was, the Java Parser project either did not exist or we were not aware of that one, but with being this year and date, I'm pretty sure that it's very easy to get started. And you could write that extension in plain Java if you want to, or any other JVM language. Any other question? Yes, over there. So the question is it supported on GitHub and GitLab? Yes. GitHub added support for Asciidoc documents as readmes or anything else. So let me show you. Let's go to Griffon. This is one of my passions, the Griffon framework. And you can see here we have a readme.adoc, and here's the readme render. If I click on the Asciidoc file, then you still render Asciidoc. Oh. PowerPoint, you always do me this. Thank you. So let's go back to the browser, and I go here, and there's a readme Asciidoc file and a built-in Asciidoc file, so I click this one. So here's the readme already rendered. But if I click on the readme here, I still see the call counter render. And if I see the raw version, I can see there's a lot of things going on in this document. And then go back. GitLab will do the same thing. I believe Bitbucket does the same thing. And there are more people, not just developers, writing Asciidoc content. Of course, it started because of developers, but now we have book authors of all sorts of places, poets and governments writing their documentation using this syntax.
Sorry. I found this amazing. I actually very like the idea that you can write Asciidoc and see it online on GitHub. I was wondering, what about custom plugins? So if I write my own custom plugins, would it be rendered there?
Not on GitHub, not yet. And that is because that poses a security risk of executing arbitrary code. So if any custom extension that you will have registered on your document, you will have to render in locally or in some other trusted environment, but definitely not on the web like in GitHub or GitLab. What will happen in this case is that the content will be rendered just as is. The tag will be completely ignored. So let's say, for example, the Big Latin extension, it will not be executed by GitHub. What will I see? I will see 2 sentences in English. And the Big Latin tag will be completely ignored. Yep. All right, well, thank you very much, and continue enjoying Box Days Milan. Ciao.